We're delighted to have with us today Melanie Leech, CEO of British Property Federation. Many of you will have seen the excellent report that was published a few short weeks ago and the details of the working group around PropTech that's being established there to tell us about that work and the thoughts of the industry. Please welcome Melanie Leech. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Great to be here. And I'm hoping actually to go away knowing a lot more and with lots more ideas as to what we should be doing as the British Property Federation than I arrive with. So no pressure, but I'm really hoping that in the conversations, once I finish speaking, and in the panel subsequently, just as you've already heard, we can get some real new ideas out there as to what an organisation like the British Property Federation can do to support digital transformation in the property sector. So if you don't know what the British Property Federation is, we are the membership association for anybody who one way or another makes their living out of the UK property market. So that's everyone from asset owners, managers, agents, investors, lenders, planning consultants, lawyers, any of those things. So we do have companies you would identify as prop tech companies in membership, but by and large, you would probably think of the British Property Federation as characterising the traditional property industry. So our role is to work with national and local governments and all of our stakeholders to create the conditions for the sector to thrive. And what that means is we have to focus on the biggest issues that are impacting on the sector, whether they're internal or external. So no surprise then that sustainability is high on our list, that driving a more diverse and inclusive real estate industry is high on our list, but also technology, innovation and digital transformation is also high on our list. We think that's particularly important, partly because we're not characterised, not known as a particularly innovative industry. We're still using what someone recently characterised as 19th century methods to do some of our activities, let alone 20th century activities. So we're behind the curve. We're not the worst industry, I would say. You know, we are changing and we are embracing new technologies, but we've certainly still got some way to go. And if we think about the agenda the government set us, remember my job is to sort of understand and work with government to drive our industry both for the benefit of the industry and its stakeholders, but also for the wider benefit of society. I guess the government's articulation of what they're trying to achieve is set out in the industrial strategy, and that sets out 4 grand challenges, the global trends which the government thinks are going to shape our future. And those are artificial intelligence and data, the ageing society, green growth, and the future of mobility. And if you think about those things, and property is at the heart of quite a lot of those things, and we will need to respond to those challenges if we're going to help support our society in the future. So we put forward a proposal for a sector deal to the government. That's a partnership between government and industry to try and respond to the industrial strategy challenges and to try and, if you like, get the government on side working with us to help us to rise to those challenges. And within that sector deal proposal, we had a whole chapter on technology and innovation. Increasing productivity is also a key theme of the industrial strategy, and again, that's an area where the property sector needs to improve. We've hit a bit of a plateau generally on productivity, so we know we need to drive that agenda. So, as Paul mentioned, we commissioned the Future Cities Catapult as a starting point for us to understand, well, where could we best engage and add value to all of the fantastic work that's going on, both in our own membership to try and change, amongst the very exciting and vibrant tech sector to try and identify challenges that it can respond to in our sector. How could we add value to that? So the Future Cities Catapult report was intended to give us a sort of sighting shot, if you like, a starting point on how the real estate sector can harness the digital revolution to drive productivity, to drive better, more efficient use of resources, and better customer service. And I was just talking just now to some colleagues who you're going to hear from on the panel a bit later on, and you heard about it in the last session. This idea of thinking about customer service, this idea of identifying customers as people who live in our buildings, who work in our buildings, who relax in our buildings, as our customers, and putting their needs at the heart of everything that the property industry does, is, I would say, relatively new to the sector in general. A number of companies are changing fast around that, and it's certainly risen up the agenda, but it's still quite new, but it's absolutely fundamental if we're going to be a sustainable industry for the future. We didn't see digital transformation as optional for our sector. As I've said, we provide that most basic of human needs, shelter, and society and what it expects from that is changing fast. And data is enabling insights and opportunities for both asset management and customer service that weren't available before. And our customers, again, you heard it on the panel just before the break, our customers have access to a lot of that data. They understand our buildings potentially better than we do, unless we really grip the agenda, understand the data and use it to manage our buildings and to offer a better service. So we can't afford not to be on top of this agenda. It's also true that our industry is a major contributor to carbon emissions, and we have to go further and faster in tackling this. We're also a major user of natural resources, and we need to make sure we do so more sustainably. And we need to improve our resilience as a sector, because we will be fundamental to the resilience of the country as we think about some of the changes that we know are coming at us, whether they're through the natural environment or whether through the way populations are growing and changing. So how did the FCC report take place? Well, we did a literature review, a number of interviews, an online survey, and we had a project board of experts, not people a lot more expert than me, industry experts, both from the tech sector and from the property sector, to help us steer and shape the work. And the key findings probably don't come as a huge surprise to anyone in this room, but they bear repetition, I think. So what we found was that digital transformation and technological innovation is not currently spread evenly across the property life cycle. In fact, it's arguable that tech companies and real estate companies don't view property in the same way at all. So we would tend to think about a life cycle of development, from identifying a plot of land through to operating a building and to its natural refurbishment or potentially demolition and renew and restart. Whereas actually, most people, if they think about property, would think about the user journey, and to think about a life cycle of development, from identifying a plot of land through to operating a building and to its natural refurbishment or potentially demolition and renew and restart. Whereas actually, most people, if they think about property, would think about the user journey, would think about the user experience. So we're coming at it from very different directions, and how do we put those 2 points of view together? The FCC report thought that government could be doing more to support the prop tech sector beyond what it's already doing. So again, we touched on it in the previous session, more about collaboration, and I'll come back to this, fostering innovation, bringing people together, identifying, if you like, the big challenges and using tech to overcome those barriers. Learning from other sectors. We're quite good at looking inward, we're not so good at looking outward. So other sectors that are further ahead of us in terms of digital transformation, what can we learn from them? And how can we bring that talent, that understanding, that expertise from other sectors into our sector to help drive transformation and change, and in particular to be more customer service oriented and to understand how tech works alongside the other tools and levers available. Culturally, the property industry needs to embrace new norms, a particular case in point being the risks and rewards of data sharing. We're not terribly good at data sharing, and coming from the outside 4 years ago as I did into property, I can see some good reasons for that in some cases, but I think it's not always the case that we need to be that protective around our data. There are more opportunities for sharing. And we need to recognise the way the world around us is changing. It will happen to us if it doesn't happen driven by us. So, recommendations of the report broadly fall into 3 parts. The first one's around improving market information, back to that data point. So understanding what is happening, what actually is the innovation that's happening out there, how can we capture that, and how can we make sure that property companies understand what's already happening, what's already available, classified in line with the way they think about things, so in terms of the property life cycle and the drivers that they face. We also thought that the BPF might be well placed, the report thought that the BPF might be well placed to sort of monitor that on an ongoing basis and also match that with a regular refreshing of an understanding of what the property companies need and where they see their big challenges. So we are going to be taking that forward through an annual survey of our members, and we've got Liquid Ray working an initial report for us to just give us a sighting shot on the state of the market, because if we're going to try and drive change, we need to understand where we're starting from, and we need to understand what's already out there. The last thing you need is another report telling you the same things over again. So how do we keep refreshing our understanding of what's happening, and how do we keep refreshing our understanding of what potential customers for tech solutions are looking for and wanting. The second set of recommendations was around creating a more collaborative and cohesive approach to championing innovation across the property sector, and starting with something as basic as a plain language and shared vision of what the future property sector looks like. How do we think the property sector is going to change, and how are we going to get there? We need regulation that doesn't inhibit innovation. A lot of my job is about trying to make sure that the regulatory framework, the legislative framework, enables property companies to thrive and flourish and be economic wealth generators, rather than that regulation gets in their way. And we know that regulation isn't very good at keeping up with innovation. So how do we try and get ahead of that curve and make sure that we don't have regulatory barriers that get in the way of using tech solutions to drive our industry forward? Better data exchange and common data standards, so possibly a property passport or something like that. That's an idea that the FCC report challenged us to think about. And better processing of design for outcomes, so improving how we think about productivity, well-being at the earliest stages of a building's design. And then the third set of recommendations were around embedding digital knowledge and fostering innovative behaviours. So back to that idea of making sure that we think differently in the property sector, and that we bring in people from outside property with more experience than some of the people in our sector have of innovation and digital transformation, and use their expertise and harness their knowledge to help us to drive change further and faster within our businesses. There might be a role for the BPF or for an organisation like ours to develop potentially courses, skills, training, collaborations that enable that knowledge to get transferred further faster. One of the things we do a lot of is showcasing good practice, making more people aware of the best of what's happening. So maybe there's a role for us around that. And also to start to think about how we can potentially collaborate better around using innovation to solve some of the big challenges. I've touched on it already, and I'll come back to that collaboration theme. So I came into this role with no background in property from the food manufacturing sector. And food manufacturing, fast-moving consumer goods, a fiercely competitive business. You know, margins are relatively small. It's all about volume, and you want to be the lowest salt product on the shelf, the lowest sugar, the healthiest product, responding to that consumer agenda. So notwithstanding all of that, you'd think that the idea of working on how to reduce salt in your products would be something that people would guard closely to themselves, and everyone would be looking for that major breakthrough. Actually, in reality, the biggest companies with the challenge came together and said, we want to work collaboratively to solve that challenge, because ultimately that will benefit the health of the nation, and ultimately that will benefit all of us. So it is perfectly possible, in my view and my experience, to find collaborative opportunities to work together to solve big challenges facing a sector or a part of a sector without giving away a competitive advantage, or without necessarily harming your own individual business. And I hope that we might find that there are opportunities to do that within property, because a lot of the technology and innovation that's out there, as was touched on earlier on, is focused at the moment on customers. And it's not surprising. We're doing Populace are doing for us a perception audit of how we're seen as an industry. And in their work amongst the general public, what we found, and it's no great surprise, is that if you say property industry, to most people, they think about estate agents, they think about buying a house or renting a home. That gives them a set of particular perceptions and experiences. But it's no surprise, therefore, that innovative people looking from outside our sector are going to start with what they know, and they're going to start with the user journey around buying or selling or renting a house. Some of the biggest opportunities, I think, to drive real change in our sector, to go back to some of those grand challenges around sustainability, using resources more productively and sustainably, will come much higher up the life cycle of a building and the building process. And I think if we could crack some of those, that would have to be collaboratively, and I think there are real opportunities for major breakthroughs around that. So that's the challenge, I think. It's not necessarily priority for the CEOs, a lot of them, although many are being very brave around some of this stuff, I think, and really leading by example. But it's not going to impact the bottom line directly in the short term. So I think part of my job, potentially working with government, potentially working with the tech sector, and I know there are representatives from the UK PropTech Association here today, and we work really closely with them. We're trying to create that dialogue and that shared agenda and common purpose that I think will be critical to solving some of these challenges. And we need to make it easy for people to buy into it. If it's not going to hit your bottom line this year or maybe next year, but it is going to over time help you transform your business, that's the opportunity I think that we have to sell and share to the leaders of our big property companies. And I think it's a hugely exciting agenda. So I think I should probably stop there and allow Paul to ask questions. But thank you again for allowing me to share some of that vision with you. And I look forward to your questions and the rest of the morning. Thank you.
Please stay here or sit down.
Yeah.
Okay. Melanie has to get off, so we're going to take questions immediately now. If you want to turn to Slido, please do that again. We'll see those come up. There were just a couple of things that I thought as you were talking there towards the end. How worried should we be when you say chief executives? A lot of them, it's not high on their priority list. That's probably a few groans internally amongst people trying to sell tech into these companies. We sound a long way off.
Well, I think it's changing fast, and as I said, there are a lot of very enlightened leaders of the industry out there, hiring people in from the outside, as we've already heard about, to help them on this journey. So maybe I expressed myself not as well as I should have done. I suppose so. I see that change happening, but I also see them under huge pressure, whether it's from shareholders, investors. So we have to make it easier for more people to be able to identify and drive through, with the support of their backers, whoever they might be, a long-term agenda for change. So I think it's about helping them to make it easy for them to sell that story, because I think they want to lead that change.
Okay. Please do put a hand up. We've got a roaming mic if anybody wants to put a question from the floor. When you talk to members about sharing data and being open with the performance of their companies, be it anonymized or not, what do they say to that?
Again, I think it's changing, but I think the culture has been around protecting data rather than sharing it, and that does need to change, I think, in some cases. I mean, there are still good reasons why there is commercial confidentiality around some data sets, but actually the world is changing fast around us. Data is much more freely available, and I think the challenge for us is to say, is that really commercially confidential? Why is that commercially confidential? Does that need to continue to be protected? And if it does, that's absolutely fine. But I think, it's the mindset thing, really. We need to challenge and go back to first principles and say, why is this sensitive? Why can't we share this? And what's the opportunity if we do become more open and collaborative?
Because you mentioned about other industries and coming from outside into the property sector. There are other industries such as hotels, that they share the RevPAR, the revenue per available room, and then there's the restaurant industry that shares sort of till receipts, the totals in their market. So it shows a benefit in other ones. Do you think that the benefits are coming across for how property could do a similar thing?
I think there's probably two parts to it. So around sort of customer data, around the way people use buildings, I think it's changing fast because they have more of that data available to them. They will share it if we don't. So we need to be ahead of that curve, actually, and be proactive about looking for that data and sharing it to learn together. I think it's trickier around the development process, and part of that is because actually data is hugely contentious in the whole conversation with local authorities around planning permissions and all of that. It's such a contentious and debated area that I think data's almost become a toxic concept, and that's why I think we need to change not only the mindset of the industry, but actually there's a mindset that needs to take place across government, national and local as well, and some of our stakeholders. So, I fundamentally believe we have more to gain than to lose, but I don't think it's easy in some parts of the development cycle.
Okay, we've got a few questions appearing on Slido. Timothy Beach asking, where do you see BIM fitting into the collaboration between PropTech asset owners and occupiers? Would it form part of the property passport, building information modelling? Yeah,
potentially yes. BIM's a great tool, but it's a kind of case in point because not enough people use it to its full extent. So, you start with what you've got and you build out from there, but absolutely.
Okay, and the role of government in all this?
Yeah, so I think one of the roles government can usefully play sometimes, particularly around this sort of identifying what's sort of pre-competitive and what are the really big things that, you know, an industry needs to tackle if it's going to make fundamental changes, as an honest broker. So bringing people together, providing a safe space, potentially providing incentives, you know, certainly not getting in the way. You know, it's always a kind of, with government, you know, you're always kind of wanting them to get out of the way so people can get on and do things. But sometimes they need either a push to push people in the right direction, or sometimes, you know, they need to shape the policy landscape so that, you know, people do kind of heard of in one direction. So I think, you know, a big part of what we do in terms of following through on the FCC report will be to go to government and to say, look, here's the agenda, you know, here's where we think you can help. And actually that will probably be around convening people, working with us around, you know, what are the things you really want us to fix? And we can go away. There are plenty of bright brains in this room and beyond, you know, who can help us fix those things if we just identify clearly what they are and make those the priority. And that's about collaboration across the tech sector as much as around the property sector, actually.
Okay, and just as we wrap up, thoughts on Monday's budget?
Well, let's just hope it is not repeated in 6 months' time in a different context. I mean, you know, the biggest challenge around the budget is it may not be the budget that sticks for the next year because the environment may fundamentally change. But actually, you know, I think I've just written a piece for Estates Gazette, which is one cheer for Philip Hammond. You know, I don't think, you know, it's fine. It's good in parts. I think that, you know, it focuses on the right areas. So it focuses, I think, around innovation and growth, and we know that's driven by SMEs in large part, so there's quite a lot of focus on supporting SMEs, but around some of the big challenges the property industry is facing, you know, the kind of the revolution that's happening in the high streets. You know, it didn't really do very much by, for example, taking away the business rates that, you know, form more than 50% of the cost base of some of the big retailers. You know, and there's a lot more he could have done, but he didn't do very much harm.
Okay. Neutral. That's great. Thank you for your time today, and do join me in thanking Melanie for her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.